cousins, which they're not bears at all. They're all these weird things, except for that little yellow guy at the bottom. It looks like a bear with a tail. And they don't even live in the same place. They live in Forest of Feelings. The Care Bears live in Care-a-Lot. So the Care Bears are up here in Care-a-Lot. And apparently Forest of Feelings is below Care-a-Lot because when they fall off the cloud, they land there. And Earth is even below that because when they have to go on missions, they go all the way down to Earth, which would put them somewhere in like low Earth orbit. And they collectively refer to this as the kingdom of caring. And they never specifically say it, but they kind of imply that Earth is the kingdom of who gives a shit. Because that's where they always have to go on their missions. But I digress. Our lead artist, Ocean, quickly kind of coined this phrase, artist in a box. You know, we're looking at all the things that an artist would typically have to do to create content in a game and figure out, you know, how can we possibly automate all these things? And then give, you know, a very simple set of controls to the player to where they feel this incredible creative leverage. The stylistic dimension that we would like the players to kind of traverse is somewhere between like Pixar and Giger. I don't think we're going to get quite that far, but I think it's the right dimension. So we want players to be able to do like these kind of Dr. Seuss worlds or these very realistic kind of scary worlds in the game. In essence, what's happening is we have the player here manipulating a very simple little system, and that's their leverage on the thing. The computer takes that very simple little system that they've built and then generates out the much more elaborate data sets, the mesh, the textures. This is actually some of the procedural texturing that we're doing, where the player has control over which scripts run, and they can be combined to get a lot of really interesting results. And they actually analyze the topology of the mesh, so you get, it knows where the back is and the belly and all this stuff. Also, the animations, which you saw, and then eventually the behavior of these things, which can be player-driven, as I was driving my little character around the world, or they can be NPC-driven. You know, when I pull in other players' characters and they're living in my world, you know, the computer is now controlling those things. Eventually, you get this, you know, very elaborate, cool-looking, realistic thing in the world. And what this represents, actually, is a creative amplification of the player's efforts. The computer is really an amplifier here, a creative amplifier on what the player's done. And if we look at how small we can actually compress these representations of, you know, the stuff that I was doing in the creature editor could probably be compressed down to about 1K bytes. In memory, with animations and textures and all that stuff, it's more like 5 megabytes. And so that's something like a 5,000 to 1 compression. Now, that buys us a lot of things. First of all, it gives the player the tremendous leverage creatively. It means that we can store a huge number of these things in a very small database. So even if you don't have a network connection, we can give you a little database, you know, on the CD with your game that contains tens of thousands of these things already if you're not connected to the net. It also gives us very low friction for moving these things. They're very cheap to move around from player to player, peer-to-peer or server-host. And also, the same things that we do to give the player leverage are almost the exact same things you would want to do to build a generative system. The computer can be playing with those knobs just as well as the player. Very much like, you know, when somebody's making a face or a character in The Sims, they're doing sliders, it's going through some process, creating the finished content. And this is kind of basically mapping to the idea of a genotype, going through embryology to an eventual phenotype. And that compression is vital for this whole thing. And those levers, again, as I said, can be pushed either by the player or by some generative system. So the pollination that's happening here is as you build a creature, it actually gets sent up to our server. And this is one model. Actually, a lot of models could work here. It could be peer-to-peer as well, where we're sorting the best content and we're categorizing it. They're also categorized by things like their life cycle and how they behave in the world, how big they are, what they eat. So we can do parametric mapping to the content. In the meantime, your world kind of requests, we need people to fill out the world that I'm going to be competing with. And they get pulled in and build a little ecosystem around you. So that's basically kind of the pollination idea here, where the world is being built around you continuously as you play. Let me go back over here. The editor. Now there's one more palette at the bottom here, which is the brain palette. Now this is what you're really trying to do here, is you're trying to save away a little bit of funds as you're playing the game and slowly invest them in the brain. This is kind of like your college savings account. You know, a lot of times you're buying stuff, oh, I'm getting beat up, I'm going to buy better weapons, or I'm going to hide or run faster. But if you can save a little bit extra, you start investing it in the brain and you work your way up kind of this ladder. Now, once you get the highest level brain, your creatures actually become sentient, and you move to the next phase. Now, at this level, the game actually mutates from kind of a first-person eater to an RTS. Now we're controlling a whole little herd of these guys. Now, one thing that I talked about landmarks last time in my talk last year, and I'm going to show you just a few of the landmarks